Welcome back to Face the Nation. We learned this week that nearly 40 million Americans have filed for unemployment benefits over the past 2 months. And while Congress has passed a number of historically large aid packages, the chairman of the Federal Reserve has warned more help may be needed. Eric Rosengren is head of the Boston Federal Reserve, one of the 12 banks that make up that system. Good morning to you.
Good morning, Margaret.
Now, you are about to launch another program, the Main Street Lending Program, within days. Now, this is about $600 billion worth of 4-year loans for mid-sized companies so they can get credit. When do you expect that money to start going out the door?
I think money will go out over the next 2 weeks. As you highlight, this is a program that's just starting up, so we're expecting to have the loan documents up this week. We then have to register the banks, and then we're going to be ready to start issuing the loans.
So do you expect this to be up and functioning, you said, within the week, but to be perhaps a little less rocky than the PPP program, that Paycheck Protection Plan that Congress had rolled out?
It's a very different program than the PPP program. The PPP program was primarily a grant program. This is a loan program. We've been working on it very hard over the last several months. I expect it'll be a relatively smooth opening.
Do you have any indication yet what kind of industries or companies will come to you to ask for this money?
So the way the program's designed is businesses that have no problems will probably find it more cost effective to go directly to banks. Firms that are having great difficulty, banks have to co-invest with us, and the banks may not be willing to do that. What we're really looking for is firms that were doing fine going into the end of last year, but because of the pandemic have now been significantly disrupted. So the kinds of firms that we're expecting to see would be the firms that have been affected by the pandemic. That includes hotels, restaurants, but it also includes many manufacturing firms that had to shut down either because of state mandates or because of concern for their workers.
And is the aim to avoid large-scale bankruptcies?
The goal is to make sure that many of these businesses are able to make it to the point where we no longer have community spread and where individuals once again feel comfortable buying goods, going out in public.
All of us want to know exactly when that might be. As for the jobless rate in this country, the White House has said they expect double-digit unemployment through November. What are you looking at? Is it really going to be double-digit unemployment until there's a vaccine?
Unfortunately, I think it's likely to be double-digit unemployment through the end of this year. And full employment, getting back down to the low levels of unemployment we saw at the end of February, probably takes either a vaccine or other medical innovations that make it much less risky to go out. The principal reason for that is that industries that have been affected, like retail, hotels, transport, are all industries that consumers have to be comfortable. So it's not just that you have to open up the businesses. Consumers have to be comfortable going back and shopping and going out on planes and into hotels.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a debate right now in Congress about whether to extend the enhanced unemployment benefits that, if people can get their claims processed, have been receiving. Those would expire in July. From where you sit, do you believe that kind of extra money is needed and should be extended?
I think we need to continue fiscal and monetary policy because double-digit unemployment risks actually causing a much more severe outcome in labor markets over time. The exact nature of that has to be up to Congress, but I do think that we're going to need additional fiscal policy.
So an extra $600, which is what it is, does that make a significant difference?
Well, that certainly makes a significant difference for low and moderate income individuals, most of whom are on hourly salaries. So I think that that is certainly one of the ways that you can provide additional support to low and moderate income individuals.
Blacks, Hispanics, women have been disproportionately hit by the economic fallout related to COVID-19. How much is what's happening now widening the income inequality that pre-existed this?
So as your question highlights, this is a serious problem. First of all, low and moderate income individuals are more likely to be put into unsafe situations. The reason is they're more likely to be in dense living. They're more likely to be taking subways, buses, trains for mass transit. And they're more likely to be hourly workers in industries that require contact with other people. So for that reason, the health outcomes are much more at risk. And also the economic outcomes are much more at risk. So in many businesses, you can work at home. Those tend to be high income workers. For many low income workers, they have to go into their job in order to be able to do the job. And those jobs are being disrupted by the fact that consumers are worried about face-to-face contact. So again, retail, hotels, restaurants are all being impacted. And until everybody's comfortable going into those restaurants and hotels, it's going to just take a little bit longer to get back to full employment than we otherwise would like to see.
You know, New England, where you are, is one of the hardest hit regions of the country. 18% of New England homeowners, 36% of renters are at risk of missing their monthly mortgage and rent payments, according to the Boston Federal Reserve. How do you avoid spiraling into a financial crisis?
So I think at least for the mortgages, banks are well positioned in terms of having plenty of capital, being well diversified. I think the actions the Federal Reserve has taken to date actually are designed to avoid those kind of financial spillovers. So we lowered interest rates to zero. We bought lots of mortgage-backed securities and Treasury securities. And all these facilities are designed to make sure that there continues to be a flow of funds to households and businesses at reasonable rates.
Are we nearing a point, though, where Congress, where the Fed will stop having to throw money at this problem?
So I can't speak for Congress, but I will say that the Federal Reserve is going to continue to do what it needs to try to get us back to full employment as quickly as possible.
Well, we will have to watch and see what Congress ends up doing. As we know, in the months ahead, there will be more debate over more aid. Thank you very much. We will watch for the program you will be launching. Stay with us on Face the Nation. We want to go now to Geoff Ballotti, the president and CEO of Wyndham Hotels Group, which is the world's largest hotel franchisor. Their hotels include Days Inn, Ramada, Super 8, Howard Johnson, and La Quinta. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having us on, Margaret.
This is sort of the unofficial start to the holiday travel season for the summer, but AAA is out saying they expect the lowest amount of traffic on planes, trains, and automobiles in modern history. What are you seeing in your hotels?
We are remarkably open, and we have been throughout this pandemic. We're the world's, as you said, largest hotel franchise company, and our 6,300 hotels have essentially all remained open. 90% of our hotels have remained open through this pandemic, serving essential workers, the frontline workers. And our hotels are continuing to pick up. It's been 5 consecutive weeks of increasing demand. We're the world's leader in the economy, the mid-scale, the select service space. Our mid-scale hotels are operating now at occupancy levels of close to 50%. They continue to see increased demand.
But how do you keep customers safe given that there are reception areas in hotels? There are people coming in and out. There are cleaning crews. Is it safe?
Well, Margaret, we believe that the most important thing anyone can do is follow the guidelines of the CDC, the WHO, and the states. And that's what we've been doing all along. And yes, our hotels have been safe. At reduced occupancy levels that are beginning to pick up. But our hotels have been cleaner than they've ever been, and we are cleaning in ways that guests are looking for those visual cues the moment they walk in, from the social distancing throughout our lobbies and our public areas to all of the increased cleanliness levels that we're introducing with hospital-grade disinfectants and EPA-certified cleaning supplies.
And everyone has to wear a mask? Is that what you mean by visual cue?
Visual cues, certainly from our employees, yes. Our employees, you will see our team members with masks And you'll see, based on the guidelines, guests being asked to wear masks as they check into the hotel.
You, as we mentioned, have franchises, and so other business owners hold on to the properties themselves. Is the emergency support that Congress and the Fed have made available, is it enough to avoid bankruptcies?
It is incredibly helpful, and we applaud the administration, we applaud Congress, we applaud all of the efforts that have been offered to our franchisees. Our franchisees look at this support as a lifeline, and 90% of our small business owners have applied for a PPP, and we believe 80% of those have either received a PPP or an EIDL loan. And it is enough to allow them to avoid bankruptcy. They view this as a lifeline, an anchor at a time when they needed it most. One of my franchisees I was talking to yesterday, Kitty Singh, felt like she was in the deep end of the pool about to sink with her 3 La Quinta hotels in Odessa, Texas, until that lifeline was thrown to her. But it has allowed them to go on, bring their employees back, pay their utilities. And what Congress, what the administration is working on now, what we're advocating on behalf of, is more flexibility and more continued support. And we think it's coming. We think we're getting it from an administration that's listening to us right now.
So what are you asking the administration to do? What do you mean more flexibility? More
flexibility in the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, in terms of how those funds will stretch out from 4 weeks to 26 weeks. The repayment from 2 years to 5 years, and the ability to be more flexible on the 75-25% rule. Right now, it's 75% of that loan must be used to pay for employee salaries, but our franchisees have other operating costs like utilities, like taxes, and like their mortgage, and they are receiving a lot of support from their local lending institutions. I mean, again, these are small mom and pop shops, yeah. And we have not seen any bankruptcies yet, and we do think they're able to operate at reduced occupancy levels and maintain that break even because of this support.
Well, we know all of that is going to be up for debate before Congress. And thank you for your time this morning.
Thank you for having us on.
We'll be right back. We go now to Michael Chertoff. He's a former Secretary of Homeland Security and is co-chairing the task force focused on reopening the District of Columbia. He joins us this morning from Washington, D.C. Good to have you with us.
Good to be on, Margaret.
The Washington, D.C. metro area has the highest positivity rate of COVID in the country, according to the White House. There's still significant virus circulating here, according to Dr. Birx. Is it safe to open the Capitol?
Well, of course, the paramount concern has been safety. And the good news, at least in the district, is it looks like over the past 11, 12 days, we've had a steady decrease in new cases, and our transmission rate is now somewhat less than 1 transmission per person. So as long as that continues, we should be in a position to begin the process of reopening in about a week. But we're doing this in a very deliberate way. The mayor has set forth a series of stages, which we've recommended, and the idea is to simply take it a step at a time and make sure while we're doing this, we're doing it in a way that maximizes safety.
D.C. is, the nerve center for the federal government. It is where members of Congress fly in and out of. There's just a unique set of risk factors here. Why do you think that there still is this level of virus circulating, and does that concern you at this point?
Well, obviously, we're concerned that you have virus at any level. We may have started a little bit later, for example, than New York and California, and therefore their peak may have been earlier. But as I say, we are in the process now, at least, of beginning to see a decline. But as you point out, Margaret, we do get a lot of visitors and people coming into work who who originate from other parts of the country. And that means we get more vectors coming in with infection than might be the case, for example, in a city where you don't get a lot of people from out of state. So that presents a unique set of challenges. And we're trying to work with our neighboring counties in Virginia and in Maryland, again, to mitigate the risk as we move forward.
Now, one of the recommendations that you put forward, whether or not the mayor takes it, is not to fully reopen schools for in-person learning until there is a vaccine. How would that work? What do you mean by that?
Well, the idea is, at least in stage one, to have distance learning, have it be done remotely. But then over the next two stages, which mean that we would have basically reduced the outbreak to isolated outbreaks, during the next period of time, we would slowly begin to bring students in. Those entering transitional grades or needing extra instruction would come in first. We'd make sure to maintain distancing in classrooms, to keep the collection of people in a particular classroom below a certain number, like 10, to make sure the same youngsters were together throughout the day so you don't have a lot of people mixing with other groups. And then to have present on staff people with health background and experience in case someone displays symptoms or some issue arises. And the idea would be eventually, during the course of this time, to basically reopen, but in a very measured and deliberate way.
Now, you, as we mentioned, ran Homeland Security at one point during the Bush administration. You simulated how to respond to a pandemic. Is the current administration running your playbook?
Well, I mean, our playbook, of course, was something that was built about 15 years ago. Some of the elements of the playbook I think we see running now. I know, for example, Dr. Anthony Fauci worked closely with us 20 years ago on this, and he's still very much involved and engaged. I think some areas where there's been perhaps a shortfall has been in the stockpiling of medical equipment and protective gear, which was not present in sufficient quantities when this began. And there was a bit of a delay, perhaps, in recognizing that we needed to deal with traveling from Europe, which turned out to be one of the major vectors for bringing the infection into the United States from other parts of the globe. But I always hasten to say that no crisis or emergency ever plays out exactly the way you've planned. What the planning should allow you to do is equip yourself and train yourself to adapt. And fortunately, we have professionals in the health field and in Homeland Security who do understand how this works.
Now, one thing in terms of planning we're looking at is the fall and the possible resurgence. That could overlap with the election. I know you look at election security. I want to read for you something the president tweeted this morning. He said, "The U.S. cannot have all mail-in ballots. It will be the greatest rigged election in history. People will grab them from mailboxes, print thousands of forgeries, and force people to sign forged names. Some absentee ballots may be okay when necessary, but this is trying to use COVID for this scam." What should national security professionals be planning for the election, and should it include mail-in ballots?
I believe it should definitely include mail-in ballots. There's never been a demonstration of widespread fraud or misbehavior in mail-in ballots. Actually, many years ago, I prosecuted somebody who committed an election fraud, but it just was a handful of ballots for people who were incapacitated. The positive side of mail-in ballots is it allows people to vote without putting themselves at risk for long lines in actual physical election voting sites. The other thing we can do in addition to mail-in is to have many more sites for curbside voting, where you drive up and you can deposit your ballot right on the site and it's in lockdown. So having the most options possible is the best way to make sure people get to exercise their very important franchise as voters.
All right, Secretary Chertoff, thank you for joining us. We'll be right back. This Memorial Day, we honor the fallen who have served our country, especially the 32 Defense Department personnel who have recently died of the coronavirus. During these difficult times, our military is out in full force. Here's our national security correspondent, David Martin.
Flyovers to honor healthcare workers across the country. Hospital ships steaming into New York and Los Angeles. The Army Corps of Engineers setting up emergency hospitals and convention centers. National Guard troops manning coronavirus testing stations. A general you probably never heard of, the Army's Gus Perna, named Chief Operating Officer of the race for a vaccine. The public has seen more of its military in this time of lockdown than it would have if the virus had never reached the United States, even though the armed forces have been observing their own lockdown.
We haven't had really any interactions with any other humans other than each other since the beginning of March.
Captain Kayvon Hakimzadeh is a commanding officer of the aircraft carrier Truman, which last saw port nearly 3 months ago.
Right now, we're doing it underway to keep the ship COVID-free.
So is that your main mission now, to stay out there and remain COVID-free?
Based on, what's going on with some other big assets in the Navy, the smartest thing to do was to keep the crew away from the shore and not have anybody else come out to us.
We spoke with the captain as the Truman steamed up and down the East Coast, operating like no other warship ever has.
A call goes out overhead. It's disinfectors, all hands man your spray bottles, kill all viruses on handrails and surfaces.
The Truman's medical officer, Victoria Begornia, says the ship is wiped down twice a day. And whenever a supply flight comes out from shore, the packages are immediately sprayed with disinfectant. Remaining COVID-free is the mission, but not exactly the glory that Truman had in mind.
We're used to being on the front lines. We're used to being the ones out there taking the risks, and roles have been reversed. Now we're here relatively safe, COVID-free, not concerned about the environment that we're living in, and our families are on the front line.
On the other side of the world, the Theodore Roosevelt finally got underway from Guam after becoming the military's most notorious outbreak of coronavirus. We spoke to Captain Carlos Sardiello shortly before he left port. Do you think this virus has changed the Navy forever?
I'm not going to speak on behalf of the entire Navy, but I'll speak on behalf of Theodore Roosevelt. It has certainly changed us forever and opened our eyes to another potential threat to our health and our ability to do our mission.
Change forever, including face masks at Arlington National Cemetery. But there are some things about the American military and what it means to this country that will never change.
We'll be right back. That's it for us today. Thank you all for watching. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm Margaret Brennan.